in case you found this morning to be a little difficult, which I'm not saying you did, because I know you've all been studying these things for a long time. But there was a passage I wanted to read from Lamrim Chema. Jay Rinpoche says, this is on page 138 of volume 3, certainty about appearances and certainty about emptiness almost never develop together. So it's extremely difficult to find this view. And then he cites a couple of passages from Nagarjuna that speak to that point. And then right before that he says, what will help you to find this view as a basis? You should be pure in upholding your ethical commitments, and then strive in many ways to accumulate the collections of merit and wisdom, clear away obscurations, rely on the learned, making efforts to study and to reflect on their instructions. And then as he continues, he is basically seeming to acknowledge that a lot of people will try and yet not quite get this straight. And that being the case, what the intelligent should do is maintain, in whatever best way they can, the understanding that the core meaning, the meaning of emptiness, is dependent arising. So that if you have an understanding of emptiness that cancels out, weakens, subverts your sense of dependent arising, then you have to change something so that at any particular time, at least, you maintain a view of emptiness that's consistent with having a sense that your actions matter and make a difference in the world. Anyway, I thought rereading this section again, I have the feeling of Tsongkhapa. It's suggested that the whole book be taken as personal instructions. And in some places, it actually has that voice. And this is one of those places where he's talking to us, personally. Okay, so in the morning, I was explaining that because there's so many different sutras and different shastras, which are commentaries and explanations and systematizations of the teachings that are in the sutras, that it becomes difficult or overwhelming for people to figure out where to start and how to make sense of how one thing relates to another. This had to have been understood a long time ago. It's because, as His Holiness has pointed out, there's more than one sutra that instructs us on how to hierarchically arrange the different sutras in terms of the priority. So there's the Sandhi-Nirmochana Sutra, which famously gives us, a system for understanding how to arrange all the other sutras. And also there's, thinking of the Akshaya Mati Nirdesha Sutra, which gives a different system, which contradicts the one in the Sandhi-Nirmochana Sutra. And so then His Holiness likes to say, well, if we needed another sutra to tell us which sutra to rely on, to decide which sutra to rely on, there would be an infinite regress. And the convenient thing would be if we could just ask the Buddha. But failing that, we'll have to use reason. And so people using reason have tried, to devise systems for ranking different views, sometimes linked explicitly to certain sutras, but definitely always linked to different shastras or treatises that explain the meanings of the sutras. And it's not the system that comes down to us today of, the Vaibhashikas, the Sautranikas, the Chittamatra, and the Madhyamaka is very far from being the only such system. In other words, the impulse that's behind creating that system is like present throughout the Buddhist world, and you see systems like that in China and Japan, and it's clear that you see them in very, very early Tibet, before anyone was using the word prasangika as a type of madhyamaka. You already had systems that divided madhyamaka into the Yogacara-oriented madhyamaka and the Sautranika-oriented madhyamaka. And I guess I was just trying to suggest that these things, from my point of view, that this has a heuristic value. In other words, it helps us to learn or gain some benefit, even though it's been, criticized for being ahistorical and blurring too many things together. It's still useful in getting some kind of a map, as per Jeffrey's metaphor in his book Maps of the Profound. So what I was trying to do last morning was posit my interpretation based on putting together things that other people have said of how to interpret this idea of what it means to say that in prasangika things are merely imputed by thought, and that the subtle root of cyclic existence is the idea, conception, that things have some way of existing in and of themselves or from their own side without being posited somehow in relationship to a point of view or an awareness, is the word that Tsongkhapa uses. And if you had that view and you were a Yogacara person and you said, well, of course everything depends on the mind because it's of one nature with the mind, one entity with the mind, then that would be understandable. But then in the prasangika way, they insist on saying that there are external objects, and yet these objects only exist in relationship to a mind. So that's what I was in the middle of talking about. And just to sort of back up a little bit and get a running start, well, like start on 11, I guess, under an interpretation. So what I was trying to suggest is that not only are there external objects, but these external objects have to have some kind of diverse character, but not from their own side. But nonetheless, they have to have some kind of diverse character relative to perspectives of certain beings. So like relative to human perspective, there's some kind of diversity in the character of the external object cat and the external object hat, as we were talking about before. It's not that we're just like making up some difference between these things. They're external objects and they have some kind of... It's appropriate for us to recognize conventionally that they have some different character from our point of view. If we take it that they have some different character on their own side apart from our point of view, in and of themselves, just naturally built into them, then we're in error, right? That's the problem. It's that we think of things that they have their just natural way of being built into them from their own side. So I was then, just thinking of how it would be from the point of view of a butterfly that was flitting over this area. And if it were to look down and say, think to itself, whatever way butterflies think, there's the Abbey, it would be very strange. And, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? So it's wrong from the butterfly's point of view to posit the Abbey in relationship to this area or the beings here or their activities. It's not just that it's like, oh, butterflies are too stupid to understand that. It's like it's not correct from their point of view. In that way, I was giving gave different examples. Apparently, I'm told that blackbirds don't see other blackbirds as black. So if they saw blackbirds as black, they would have something wrong with their eyes, even though they're blackbirds. Because we're the ones who decided to call them blackbirds. Why? Because from our point of view, that's the kind of diversity of character that we see in those external objects. But it's not like they have a natural blackness built into them. So then, point 13. Prasangikas and Svatantrikas. That means, really what that means is Chandrakirti as interpreted by Tsongkhapa versus Bhavaviveka as interpreted by Tsongkhapa. They agreed that conventionally fire is hot, water is wet, and that ultimately neither of them is either of those things. We're talking about that means from our point of view, it's appropriate to make these designations and recognize the distinctiveness of fire from water as having these kinds of character. But according to Tsongkhapa, the Svatantrikas think that this conventional hotness of fire and so forth is something that's part of the natural character of fire. That it's like it's there in the fire as its basic character conventionally. Now, of course, the Svatantrikas are Madhyamikas, and they're basing everything on Nagarjuna, and say they know if you ask the question, is fire ultimately hot, or can we find the essentially existent hot nature of fire, that you won't be able to find it. So none of the people in this discussion are disagreeing about that. The question is, okay, given that fire is not ultimately hot, can't we say that fire is conventionally hot? Well, both Tsongkhapa says that, and so does Bhavaviveka. The question is whether you think that conventional hotness of fire is just is the intrinsic character. What do you say, Rangitseni that it's the distinctive character of fire on fire's own side, or whether that conventional hotness of fire is something that's positive relative to our human point of view. So, this is like, just because I'm on fire and water, I was trying to think, okay, for whom would fire, every time I think about it, it's like fire's only hot from our point of view. Well, who is it not hot for? This is like I'm constantly doing this with everything. Who is the blackbird not black for? Who is the fire not? So I think it's like, I don't know actually, right? Because I'm making up these examples, but it seems to me that if you had been burning in a Avicii hell for a while, and then you got a taste of one of our fires, you might feel a sense of relief. No? Right. Also, if you talk about our fire relative to, if there's a being who's somehow able to live on Mercury or in proximity to the sun, then they would think, our fire would be quite a cooling relief experience, right? So it's not just like, it's all relative to. It's like that different types of beings could correctly see what we call fire, could correctly identify what we call fire as cool. It's hard to. It's like, okay, is that harder or easier to think about than the fact that the table's not made out of atoms? It's the same kind of thing. It's like it requires you to change your. It's a way of understanding that this view is not everything we always believed, minus this hypothetical intrinsic nature, which we didn't really know about and weren't worried about before. That's always the problem with the Gelugpa approach, is that it starts to sound like, don't worry, everything's conventionally validly established. So it's tables are tables, chairs are chairs. You're missing this other little piece, but you never worried about it before, so don't worry about it now. And it's like, well, when you start talking about fire could be cool from some point of view, or tables aren't made of atoms, and you start to realize that, well, that's not exactly it. This is a really different way of looking at things than we're normally accustomed to, that we're habituated to, or I'm habituated to some extent. So that seems okay. So then comes the problem that we always have been asking the Geshes since I was in graduate school. If, per Tsongkhapa, all objects have to be posited through the force of an awareness, posited in relationship to how they appear to an awareness, what about the Big Bang? What about as yet undiscovered things in the rainforest? What about minerals that are under the earth that nobody's seen yet but will be seen in the future? What about the tree falls in the forest when no one's there? Venerable Children and I were talking earlier about like, well, does it mean that bacteria never caused disease until the 18th century? When the microscope was discovered? It doesn't seem like what do you say? It was His Holiness's words to say, this would be uncomfortable. Yeah. So, there's actually, I don't know, there's this is where you get, because this question wasn't exactly posed in these terms, it wasn't the focus of concern traditionally, then you get a diversity of responses from contemporary Gelugpa Geishis. And the one that I was referring to this morning, whose name I don't know, but somebody sent me his manuscript, was actually saying that each time that to say that this or that object is here, it has to be posited by a mind that's there at that time with the object. So that leads to down the path where you have to posit for the tree falling in the forest some kind of mind that's observing that in order for that to have actually happened, and so forth. When we all leave this building and there's no one here, there'll still be maybe a stray ant, or I don't know. You have to go, or you can go the Buddha's omniscient mind, or some clairvoyant being in a different galaxy or world system. You have to start doing like that in order to account for that. So that is one answer. I know that this isn't actually something that from reading this text, even though this isn't what His Holiness says, I know that there are some contemporary Gelugpa Geishis who strongly feel that we should not move away from that way of understanding this quite literally. Then I have heard one person say, and I don't remember which exact Geishi it was, who said that this is a case of when you try to press too hard on the question of what it means for things to be merely imputed by thought, you're actually doing an ultimate analysis. That is, you're analyzing the ultimate. It's like asking, what is a potato really? What is a chair really? You're saying, what does it really mean for it to be imputed by thought? And implicitly, of course, you're not going to ever be able to pin it down, because you can never pin down what anything is really, because things don't have any essence. I don't know. It's not an utterly implausible response. I've noticed that the tendency is in Tsongkhapa's system, his followers, is to not want to give up on analysis too quickly. I want to see how far we can go in trying to explain things, how things work, before putting up the white flag and saying, well, this is all ultimate analysis, and therefore we can't really say anything other than just these words. I notice in reading a lot of Gelugpa books in Tibetan over the years that people will always come up against some conundrum like this that they can't really answer. And they don't like to say it's inconceivable. They don't like to say that. If you were a different order, if you were Gaggyupa, they would say it's inconceivable, but here's some words, but it's still inconceivable. But they don't do that like in Gelugpa. They say they have a different formula, which is Chebar Jao, which means this remains to be analyzed further. We need to do more work on this. Yeah. The assumption, of course, is that it's already been fully understood by the Buddha and Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti and Tsongkhapa. But, somebody has to flesh out the details, and haven't quite worked them out over the centuries on a few of these fine points. 18. Was somebody 18 or... Let's see. Some cases must be designated mind. Some say the question is an ultimate analysis. And Geshe Pelden Thakpa says that he was my teacher for a few months in India, and who really helped me a lot when I was working in 1985. Losaling Geshe. And he said that this idea that things, all phenomena, are imputations by thought, doesn't mean that there's like a thought that has to be there each instant in order to posit it. So exactly the opposite of what the other guy said. He said, what you should think of it as the measure, and that's the word "se" in Tibetan, the measure of how real things are. is things are real in the sense that they exist, but are mere imputations by thought. And Geshe Pelman talked about this way of explaining this. Was also used by Kensei Yeshu Tupten when he was talking to Anne Klein. There's this book, Path to the Middle, which is like all based on oral explanations of Kensei Yeshu Tupten about Madhyamaka to Anne. And he gives this same sort of example and uses the idea of a pound of butter. So you don't always have to have the pound of butter on the scale. It's a pound of butter even when you take it off the scale. It's not just a pound of butter when it's on the scale. That's seems to make so much sense. Right? And that's the same thing that Geshe Pelden Takpa, I think, was trying to tell me when he used the word that this is the measure of how real things are. The scale, I was thinking, what is the scale? The scale is the designating mind, right? But it doesn't have to be on the scale all the time to exist as having that status. So then, what does it mean, and this isn't actually on the paper here, what does it mean to say that things are mere imputations by thought? It's excluding the idea that they can be found anywhere on the side of the basis of imputation. That's what it's supposed to mean. Like when you say, why do they say they're mere imputations by thought? And then they won't explain to us when and where this thought is occurring. Well, it's because what they're trying to do is say that things aren't set up on the side of the object, that you're not going to find over there on the side of the object the thing within the car that makes the car, even conventionally, because conventionally the status of things is to be imputed or ascribed, in relationship to a collection, but not findable even conventionally as one of those elements within the basis of imputation. I know that's I don't know if you're following, but it's that's actually super important point. I mean, that's actually what it means, right? That's what it's actually about. It's if there were something over there on the side of the object that conventionally was the object in and of itself, then that would be from in Tsongkhapa's way, that would be the distinctive character of that thing on its own side, apart from my designating activity, right? Yeah.
When they say that, that it's only a measure of how real things are, that's true and that makes sense. But it's kind of another way of saying don't ask that question.
Yeah.
But if you make that statement that that's how things exist, then you should be able to ask a bunch of questions about it too.
Yeah. Well, right, we should be able to ask a bunch of questions about it. I don't know. I don't think that the scale answer is a dodge, to put it bluntly, because I think what it's pointing at, although it wasn't spelled out to me at the time, but I think what it's pointing at is this idea that, when we say that things are mere imputations by thought, we're saying that in order to eliminate this idea that things can be found among their basis of imputation. And that's what if the scale is, that's what the scale thing is. That's how heavy things are ontologically. They're just that heavier and no heavier. That's how I understand that. And so then, of course, we still want to know, okay, well, we get that, but if they are still designations or imputations by thought, when does this take place? Which I think that's your question. It's you're still left the question. It's okay, it doesn't have to take place every single second, but when is it taking place? And this is where you have the issue about can we designate things retrospectively into existence? So Kenser Yeshe Tipton told Anne Klein that designation does not need to be simultaneous with or prior to the thing designated, but can occur after the designated thing. So he told Anne that you can have retrospective designation of something. That external objects exist, but we can't say what they are except from a certain point of view. And it may be the point of view that designates something as a bacteria hasn't arisen before the 18th century. It doesn't mean that from our point of view, it's quite clear that it's suitable to make the designation bacteria, and that these bacteria existed for a long time, right? It's not like they didn't exist before. They existed before, but the mind from whose point of view that made that designation hadn't arisen yet. So we were talking, on the break about how, well, that means once you get that idea that things can exist but not yet have been designated as what we correctly take them to be now, you can explain the Big Bang, but you can also explain the conventional existence of things that we don't know about. Just because, flip to the looking in from the other point of view. I mean, there's got to be all kinds of things which we don't know about yet, but which we will know about, right? And once you think about it like that, then you realize that this way of thinking about it allows for progress and knowledge. It doesn't just leave us frozen with, okay, everything people believe in minus the stuff that's discredited above valid cognition equals the world. No, because there are things that do conventionally exist, but relative to the perspective of mind that hasn't arisen yet. And not only that, it's quite clear that those things which we don't know a name for and haven't yet designated can act as causes. Because otherwise people wouldn't have been dying of the plague, etc. We wouldn't be here because there wouldn't have been a Big Bang yet, because we wouldn't have been here to call it the Big Bang and so forth. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just like it has to be. Once you say they're external objects, you have to have them be able to function as causes, even when you don't know what they are yet and haven't been able to designate them. Yes.
So one of the things that I brought to my mind when I was reading through this and you mentioned the Big Bang is that our total knowledge of the Big Bang, none of us experienced the Big Bang, so what we're doing is we're making an analysis based on what we're perceiving now, and
right.
We're applying a theory to it, and the theory, and it's a matter of probability, and most of the time we don't respond from a probabilistic perspective. We either say 100% or 0. Mm-hmm. But when you take something like, for example, the Big Bang, we're doing reverse analysis. We're looking back to the past and we're doing some kind of teleological, probabilistic statement about what might have happened, which is still within the realm of what some Kappa is saying.
Oh yeah.
Because in the same way that we designate a snake on a rope is exactly what we're doing when we're postulating the Big Bang. Mm-hmm. We're applying previous learning to something, and we're coming up with a story to tell ourselves about it, and the validity of that story is exactly the same as the validity of whether or not the rope is a snake or not. Does it function? Does it answer questions? Are there contradictions?
That's true. It's testable, right, in that sense.
And even testing is, even the concept of testing things still comes from our mind. It still doesn't come from on the other side. The Big Bang has nothing on its own side, and that's actually a really good example of something that is not anything on its own side. It's entirely out of our own minds, and telling each other a story over and over again, and shaping that story and saying, see, it explains this, this, and this, oh, that makes it a good theory, but it's still a story.
One of the things I don't know, it takes us into the realm of philosophy of science and comparing it to Tsongkhapa. But generally speaking, working scientists tend to be realists, and they take it that they're discovering things about the world out there and knowing the nature of these things. But people who study the philosophy of science take a view much more like the one that you're articulating. And if scientists, actually take a philosophy of science course, then they'll realize that they're not actually getting at the intrinsic character of the object on its own side. They're looking at patterns of how things appear and then making predictions about how it's likely to work based on that before, which can always be disconfirmed. And that, I think, in a sense I always felt that Tsongkhapa has these three criteria for what it means for something to conventionally exist. That it's something that's known to the world, and it hasn't been discredited by conventional legitimate knowledge, and hasn't been discredited by ultimate analysis. Those are the three criteria. And until today, I always thought that there was a problem with that in relationship to science, because it's sort of like you have everything that's known to the world, say in Tibet in the 15th century, or India in the 7th century, and you subtract things that we found out are wrong, and then you're left with the sum total of conventional knowledge. And where does new understanding come from? It has to be this process of discrediting things that were taken to be known by the world and discovering new things that the world didn't know about before, right? And you can understand that in Western philosophy sciences, is creating new models. We're always creating new models for how things work, and as long as they work, then we keep relying on them.
And we're happy. And
right.
As long as they function.
Right.
As long as they function conventionally.
Yeah. I don't know. Somebody have to do some work on comparing Potter to Tsongkhapa. But so anyway, I got, it's like there's two sources, Kensur Yeshe Thupten telling Anne Klein, and then also Alan Wallace, if not sure where he gets it, but he said in his book Choosing Reality, he's very explicit about this same idea, and I think he talks about the Big Bang. He said that things can serve functions that we attribute to them, and then come into existence as this or that is, like retroactively, when they're posited by the mind. It just sounds a little bit strange to me. This like how can they, if they're not this or that until later, then how can they work as a cause earlier? And my way of understanding this in 21 is that this isn't any kind of magic or eternal backwards and forward in time quantum physics thing. It just means that externally there are all these diverse, conventionally diverse objects, whether they're diverse they have a diverse character relative to the point of view of this or that being, and they each give rise to certain effects and not to other effects conventionally. But which diverse qualities are properly considered to be, what these particular qualities are properly considered to be, depends on the point of view. So when that point of view could be one that arises like 1 second later, or 1 millisecond later, or 1 eon later, that they can be posited. So you see what I'm saying? So there's things that are around us right now, we'll posit, not just the Big Bang because it's looking at us. Like I would say, the things that are here right now, they're having some active effect on our world, but which we don't have a name for, or we haven't designated, they haven't been imputed as existing yet. But they're still able to work and function. And they have the measure of being merely imputed by thought. Okay, that's my understanding of this. I think that probably the Geshe who says that's not good enough, you need a mind there imputing it every second, feels that my way of looking at it goes too far in the direction of giving external things too much reality or real character or something like that. But that's why, as we were pointing out earlier, you have to keep reminding yourself that the conventional existence of things as this or that is relative to the point of view of a mind that perceives it as this or that. And it's not naturally established in the object. So then, this is kind of where I stopped when I was here last year, and I didn't know where to go next with thinking about, path objects. So now this is like, uncharted territory to some extent. So a particular act, such as killing someone, doesn't necessarily naturally, from its own side, count as virtue or non-virtue. It would be strange to claim that it did after considering that nothing else is what it is intrinsically from its own side, and then suddenly, those rules don't apply when we're talking about virtue. So you have to somehow say that particular acts don't exist naturally as virtue or non-virtue in terms of their own character on their own side. So it's considering, this is what I'm going to say for today, considering what brings help to certain beings in certain situations, that is, taking into consideration particular points of view, particular context, things, this or that action can be posited as virtue or non-virtue. Now you could do it just by realms, right? You could say, like, that's the way the sutras tend to go, gods, humans goes and say, like, right? I mean, where do you make the dividing lines between what is a legitimate perspective? And the tradition was just to divide it between the realms. So for humans, if we look at the water and think it's nectar, then that's not like a cultural preference that it's right. It's water from our point of view. So you could make the argument that, certain things are virtuous for humans that might be different for leopards or something like that, maybe. Do you see what I'm saying? It might be different. Leopard virtue might be different from human virtue. I don't know. What I want to try to do is avoid going to a position of cultural relativism where everybody's allowed to have their own rules about what's good and bad, right? And it seems like, I don't know, the idea that we're endowed, sort of endowed by our own past actions with certain kinds of faculties, right, that we have in common as humans, that this biological, we would say, this biological commonality is what is the basis for saying what's appropriate from our point of view, from a human point of view. So, do you see what I'm saying? The common reference point is not, I kind of want to say that it's species-based, but in the tradition it's not even species-based, it's realm-based.
When they talk about the four characteristics of karma, and they say the first one, that happiness is always produced by virtue and unhappiness by non-virtue. They say that, to me, that how they describe it really brings in the whole idea of emptiness and dependent arising, because something's not virtuous or non-virtuous from its own side, but is labeled, designated as such, simply in reference to
bringing happiness or unhappiness.
In reference to it's the result that it brings.
Right, exactly. And so that's right. And so if and then see that leads into this the issue of upaya and different kinds of that in some situations unconventional behavior can be actually the most skillful behavior, because in particular situations it could be the behavior that leads to happiness. So the example that I gave in the morning, which is easy, is His Holiness advocating wrong views. Right? He's for a particular audience at a particular time on a particular day, he doesn't say, everything I'm about to tell you is wrong. He just preaches about the Lord to these particular people on this particular day, because that, and so what is that, right? It's not that one should take up wrong views in general, right? But that, you can have if you designate the rightness or the virtue or non-virtue relative to its effect and not because of some characteristic it has on its own side, you can see how some people can get to the point where they're able to do skillfully things that ordinarily might be designated as non-virtue, but in that particular situation, they know that those particular acts are tending toward happiness. And I mean, that's just an example, a real-life example that comes to mind, but there are examples in the sutra, like in the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra. There are a number of examples in there, too, where the text seems to be suggesting that Bodhisattva can do basically whatever, if in that particular context, that's the thing that's most helpful to the people that Bodhisattva is trying to help. The skill Thurman uses for upaya, or we say skill and means, I guess. You say skill and means? What do you say for skillful means? Okay, Thurman is doing skill and liberative technique, which of course adds in a whole word that's not there. But it makes it clear that it's not skillful means for chopping carrots necessarily, all right? And it's particularly skillful means in helping people become free from the afflictions. I thought of I don't know if it's exactly the same thing, but there's this famous story about the famous Zen story about the road that's washed out by the flood, and the two monks coming along in the rain to this washout, and there's a woman there in a long gown, and she can't get across because if she goes into the water, she'll be washed away. And one of the monks picks her up, and then both monks wade across, and they put her down, and they go their way, she goes theirs, and like about an hour later, one monk says to the other, "What do you think you were doing back there?" And the other guy said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Oh, you touched that woman." And he said, "Oh, are you still carrying her? I put her down back there." It's like, so then you just like, well, was that a virtuous action or a non-virtuous action, for the monk to touch the woman, and who actually touched the woman in that situation? Then there's the big controversy about the past life of the Buddha in which he murdered a sea captain, right? And it's like, he murdered the sea captain because he knew that the sea captain was about to kill everybody on the ship, like 500 merchants, right? He knew that, and nobody else knew it, but he was. So then the question becomes, if you're, not an Arya, and you're bound by cause and effect of karma, and you form an intention to stab someone to death, and you successfully do it, I killed that guy, right? Then it seems pretty clear that you have all the qualifying, features for a very bad, hellbound kind of karma. But on the other hand, the basic motivation was completely virtuous. Right, and it not only saved all these guys from drowning, but it also saved the sea captain from the karma of killing all those guys. So it's like, what happens, right? And then there's this like, well, what do you do with a case like that? Where you have bodhisattvas who are not on the pure grounds, but engage in actions that are karmically problematic, to say the least, yet are motivated within a pure aspiration. You have a positive.
Yeah, what they very often say there is that bodhisattva has so much compassion that even though they will go to the lower realms because of killing, they are willing to endure that. But then, when they go to the lower realms, again because of their compassion, the karma is purified very quickly.
Yeah.
But that whole story, that whole thing, it's so dangerous because it really makes people think about ethical relevance.
Relativism,
and it's the biggest story that people use to rationalize their own bad behavior.
Sure, because it's all well intentioned. Yeah. Oh, that's true. The bouncing. That's you gave the serious straight face version of the bouncing explanation, which seems to be a dominant response. People say different things in different Buddhist texts because that story's been around for a long time. But I think, the Tibetans that I've talked to recently have said, what Venerable Chodron just said is that the person, such a bodhisattva who is not on the pure ground would go to hell but not stay there. And like some people say, he was there for this long. And then bounces up to one of the higher realms again like that. No, it's true. I mean, I don't... Okay, that's why I didn't go into this before, because exactly what you just said. So it's not really like... you have to consider that it's like an advanced practice to be able to do this kind of thing. And that we have precepts and for a purpose, because these guide us in the path of virtue, and that it's very presumptuous or arrogant to think that we can just because we have good intentions, it's really better for us to ignore the rules. But it seems like the tradition, anyway, the reason I wanted to bring it up was not to make an ethical argument, but just because I felt a sense of dissatisfaction about not extending this analysis of what it meant for things to exist as mere imputations by thought. It's fine to talk about blackbirds and chariots and so forth, but what about virtue and non-virtue? That's where it gets... I don't know. It could be more skillful and liberative technique. Just leave it out of the discussion. That occurred to me. Oh, okay.
Because people just totally misunderstand that whole thing.
Okay. Well, it was nagging at me. I felt like I had to think about it. So page the number 25 in the back. Ethical conduct, like colors and temperatures, perhaps may be different in different realms or even for different species, depending on what constitutes a valid basis for help relative to their framework. And in a Buddhist point of view, there's compassionate understanding of each being's point of view, while in terms of our own perspective, all things appear as a pure land or mandala. So I'm just saying this stuff, based on what I've learned in the tradition, trying to figure out how to posit these things. So knowing that all things are empty of existing from their own side doesn't cancel the fact that a spoon is a spoon. A spoon is a spoon. Conventional facts are facts relative to the relevant perspective, not in and of themselves, not from their own side, not because they have some subtle spoonosity, built into them in any way, even conventionally. So then I thought of, lastly, because His Holiness actually brings this up in How to Practice, about how Tantra says, likewise, the alternative perspective of Tantra is one in which ordinary appearances are abandoned, but this does not cancel out the conventional validity of my house being a house made of wood and stone. If it did, then we would be wrong to recognize non-virtue even when we see it, since, in fact, all that we see is within the blissful mandala. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like people saying, well, we're visioning all of this as part of the blissful mandala because we're taking it from the point of view of our fundamental Buddha nature, and then all these people are going around doing horrible things. That's all part of the activity of my blissful mandala, right? That doesn't seem like that can work, right? So we have to... So His Holiness says about that, you are purposely imagining yourself as having a divine body, even if at present you do not possess one. And you do this based in clear imagination of an ideal body and mind, cultivating a sense of being a deity. So the reason that this comes up is because, there's this idea of, I think you say dignity, right? Or do you say dignity? Yeah, divine dignity. And in tantric practice, is somewhat analogous to the worldly concept of method acting, where you don't pretend to be a divine being, but take to mind that that you are actually the Buddha, and that you have the Buddha's body, speech, and mind. So if you're taking that to mind, the question comes up is, why is that not a wrong view? Or if it's a right view, then what does that do relative to all the houses being made out of dirt? Right? So His Holiness seems to be saying that even though you're practicing this practice of divine pride or divine dignity, it's within a framework of aspiration. Just like a method actor who goes into character knows that they are a method actor going into character, or else then they really are. Do you see what I'm saying? You can, and children can engage in very, very, very vivid imaginary play where they're not pretending from their point of view at that moment. But then within a larger framework, when there's cookies and milk, then they can snap right out of it. And they understand that, that was a game. Something like that, I think. So tantric practice involves imagining as an aspiration and rehearsal a perspective that is not yet actually correct from one's current point of view, but which will become correct from one's point of view as an awakened being. Theoretically, unpreferably, we could pick any other sort of being and train our minds in seeing things as they're seen from that other being's point of view. We just happen to pick a Buddha out of all the possible beings. But, you can notice some people, it's like, dogs are so great. I aspire to be a dog someday. So I will just start taking to mind right now as if I am a dog and try to look at everything from a doggish point of view and imagine my body as a dog's body and my mind. Look my body, speech, and mind as a dog's body, speech, and mind, right? And so it's all false, of course, right? It's all false, for now. But you take it to mind as though it were true with the aspiration that, you will attain to doghood in a future lifetime, right? And it seems to me that that's the idea. If you want to become a perfect embodiment in wisdom and compassion, then you vividly can take to mind that and train in that way of looking at things. That's what I'm trying to say. And that. So I think I already said this, but so divine pride, taking to mind with conviction that one entity is not a wrong consciousness and that is an intentional adoption of an alternate perspective. In other words, it would only become a wrong consciousness if there came to be no framework within which the practitioner was able to recognize that she's a human who's doing this practice. Perhaps that happens, I don't know, but maybe there, does. Yeah, I haven't actually met people like that. But
I met people who visualize things as a pure land, and then they really get kind of
into it too.
Yeah, they get mentally unstable.
They can't get out of it
because they think it's an inherently existing pure land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, that was my effort to go beyond what you find in Lanun Chemo and relying on what His Holiness and some of my other teachers have said, try to piece together some way to posit the status of things in Prasangika Madhyama according to Tsongkhapai's system, and then go actually even a little bit beyond what any teacher has taught to me and try to extrapolate from what they did say to me. So, let's see. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah, just a bit confused actually. So looking at the Svatantrika point of view, for a moment you mentioned seeing ultimately reality the same as the Prasangika, but they're conventional, how they see things conventionally, like the hotness in the fire, for example, is something that seems to exist from its own side. Are they, so that do the Svatantrikas basically think there's something findable in the aggregates? Is that what they're saying there? If there's something from its own side? Okay, so then the next question is... But
not ultimately.
No, I know, but that was my question. I don't get... If they're seeing how something is findable in the aggregate, then I don't see how you get your mind around saying, but ultimately nothing exists. I don't see how you go from that.
Well, that's correct. That doubt, qualm, is correct from a Prasangika point of view. I mean, I think in previous years when we've talked about that, I've heard Venerable Chodron express the point of view that's similar to what you're saying. It's like, well, how can this possibly make any sense to say that things have some character from their own side, but then in and of themselves, yet nothing is found when you ultimately analyze them? Because if they had some character from their own side, wouldn't that be something that you would find under ultimate analysis? Okay? So that's a Prasangika argument. And so in that sense, it represents a qualm posited from a correct point of view. But let me back up to the very first thing that you said. So I was trying not to quite say that they have the same view of the ultimate. Why? Because now some people actually say that. Some people, I've just been reading a bunch of stuff about this, and some people actually claim that they have the same view of the ultimate but a different view of the conventional. And this doesn't make any sense to me at all, and it doesn't make sense. In Tsongkhava's system, the ultimate is the mere absence of the subtlest object of negation. And his whole book is essentially about trying to show that the non-prasangikas have not quite made it. And that's what I was trying to say, is well, you haven't quite made it, and this is as good as a mile. It's the implication is that even though these people are legitimately madhyamikas in good faith, and they realize that things are devoid of any, existence that's any sort of existence that's findable under analysis, they certainly could be considered, Nagarjuna uses the phrase svabhava shunyavad. That means that we're advocates or people who talk about the emptiness of essence in things. That svabhava would be something that you would find under ultimate analysis. There are also Svatantrika point of view will clear our minds that Svatantrika point of view is we're just exactly the same as all the other madhyamikas. We know that things exist conventionally and things don't exist ultimately. So not existing ultimately means when you search for things, you don't find them under analysis. Existing conventionally means that they can nonetheless function as long as you don't subject them to this searching scrutiny as to their fundamental ontological character. They work just fine as this and that. So we're the same as you guys, right? That's what it says. But then, this is part of the question: is Tsongkhapa claims that they're not the same. And it not being the same about how things are conventionally definitely directly implies not being the same about how things are ultimately. If you give a little bit of extra status to things on the conventional side, that it means that you haven't quite negated enough in terms of on the negative side, on the ultimate side. And that means that you haven't refuted the subtle object of negation. Now, how is it that they see it as that things have their own character? First of all, remember, ultimately you can't find anything when you analyze from a Svatantrika point of view, because that's what Nagarjuna showed to be true. So now the question is, what does it mean to say that things exist conventionally? This is where you get a difference. And so things exist in relationship to a mind, you could say that. But think about it like this. If you just clear your mind of your prasangika prejudices for a minute, think about that dependent arising means that things come into existence through an interaction between the mind and the object. They're not just on the mind side, which would be yogacara. They're not just on the object side, which would be, I don't know, non-Buddhist maybe, we'll say. They're a collaboration or an interaction between the mind and the object. The object has to make some contribution, right? So there has to be something on the object side that makes the object what it is. Otherwise, what's it going to contribute? It can't just wait around to see what the mind wants it to be. It's got to have something over there on its own side. Not ultimately, but it has to have something over there on its own side that it is conventionally. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what it's contributing. It's contributing something that Tsongkhapa calls Rangi Sini, its own distinctive character, its own characteristic, its own qualities that are on its own side, from its own, on its own side. And so, we'll talk more about this in the next day or two. But one of the things this means is like it has to do with sense perception, right? So if everything has its own quality or characteristic, merely conventionally, but it has its own quality and characteristic, then, you know, when the sense consciousness has an appearance of, you know, hot, right? Then that's okay at the sensory level, because it is hot. Its hotness is there. Not ultimately, we can't find it when we search for it, but conventionally, it has its own hotness. Of course, right? That's what allows it to function, to burn, conventionally, not ultimately. So, why wouldn't we not recognize that? And so, because that like appearance of this hot thing is as hot is correct, right? Then there's no error at the raw sense level, right? There isn't like a false appearance of things as their senses. The problem is that we overlay on top of this, you know, assuming that our senses are all working well. Then the problem is that we overlay on top of this basically accurate sense data some misconceptions about how these things exist. You know, we take it as being naturally existent as hot in and of itself. Well, of course, if it were, then you're back to then it would hold up under ultimate analysis, which it doesn't. But conventionally, it has its own hotness, and we can experience that hotness correctly as long as we don't make the mistake of taking it to be some inherently existent hotness. We're okay. I want you to see that this could be like a persuasive point of view. It's not just, you can also, you know, turn it around and argue that it's completely contradictory, which is the Prasangic point of view. But one of the things a couple of things that you would gain if you could acknowledge that there's some svalakshana, there's some in Sanskrit, Rangitsini in Tibetan, there's some distinctive individual character, own characteristic on the side of the object. One thing is that it speaks to how logic can work, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. Like, if you're arguing with people who, you know, all agree that when we see a tree, it's green because it has a green characteristic conventionally, then it's easier to get the conversation started. That's the idea, because we're talking about the same thing, right? And our raw sense data is like what we use to build arguments out of, like what you were talking about earlier. You have information from your senses. Well, if you're going to make inferences or deductions about how the world works, you can't start from nothing. You have to start from the sense data. Well, if the sense data would be clean, like unlike this morning where I was talking about the colorblind person, well, that's a Prasangic view of our problem. We have to reason our way to understanding our own ontological colorblindness. The Svatantrika doesn't have that point of view. It has to have that problem. And in Tsongkhapa's presentation of what a Svatantrika is. That's what I'm saying. Yes, Brian.
So, if you're looking at an object in the room and maybe you checked out some object before I walked in the room and you're already imputing something on it, and I come in and I see it differently, and I'm imputing something else on it. It's not going to change what you're imputing on it. Is there something there beyond what we're imputing? Either one of us. And if so, that kind of solves the problem of whether something's there until mind imputes it.
Because there's already something.
It's the thing, the characteristics that we're imputing, and it doesn't have any of those characteristics. This is
I know, it's hard.
Poorly phrased question.
Well, I think that you can't say that there aren't external objects, because if you do, then you're not in the Madhyama. You're not in the Prasangic system at all anymore. And also Bhagavad Gita holds their external objects. So there are external objects. Now, when you're talking about comparing how you and I perceive a a certain object in the room. There could be like cultural differences or differences in the way our eyes are set up or something like that. But that's what they're really talking about, is differences that exist between types of beings that are like biologically means karmically, that their karma has created their senses in a different way. So if you use bats as an example or something like that, where there's like, it's correct for them to see it in a totally different way, because that's the way their mind-body karma complex sets things up, right? But for us, we can have a discussion about, like, well, you know what I'm saying, as fellow humans who have roughly the same sense information, right? Same kinds of body and mind, and you can say something's a toaster, and I will say that it's a water fountain. And it's like, it's unlikely that we're both actually correct. So we'll have a discussion about, like, well, what does the evidence seem to suggest? It could be some sculptor made a toaster water fountain, and it could be seen as one thing from one point of view and the other from another point of view, but more likely, one of us is wrong. Right? It doesn't just become that because, that's our perception at a certain time. A lot of times it's really clear that we have misperceptions of objects in our environment. Like I was saying the other day when Becca and I thought that this stick was like a chipmunk or a squirrel or something like that. Because to both of us, for a moment, it vividly appeared to be. But it wasn't actually, ever. So, I don't know, you can be, just because you posit something or take something in a certain way, doesn't mean that that's correct. People have all kinds of wrong perceptions about stuff. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many problems. I don't mean just ultimately. I mean, conventionally, we have all kinds of wrong perceptions about things. And I think a lot of what we do is, go through the process of trying to, this like argument about how things should be at the conventional level based on shared sets of evidence. Like, what does it mean to be a human being, right? And what would be the right way to organize our society based on what a human being is? That you have laws and so forth, right? And people can disagree, right, about how they should be set up, but it's still, an ongoing process of trying to work with the same set of evidence about what it means to have this kind of mind and body. I don't know if I answered it. I answered it as well as I could understand it. Yes. Okay, Stephen, and then
so this is making me think of the simile of the mirage, that's an insight into emptiness, that describes our aggregate of discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to me, it seems like, so the mirage is that we're able to distinguish water on the pavement, or it appears as water on the pavement. And so, is that basically saying that everything's emptiness, but we're seeing these things are appearing out of that? Does that make sense?
I think I know what you're saying, but yeah, I have something to say about it. So, first of all, literally, according to Tsongkha's system, you can't say that everything is emptiness. Because if everything was emptiness, I'm seeing something, I'm therefore seeing emptiness directly. Therefore, I've been seeing it directly for a long time, therefore I'm probably a Buddha, or at least an Arhat. Can't be. Can't be that literally everything is emptiness. So, on the other hand, there isn't anywhere that emptiness isn't. So, in some sense, I could say, what is this? And, Buddha's truth body could be a possible correct answer. Do you see what I'm saying? It could, depending on how you look at things, depending on your point of view. I mean, it could be because there isn't any other place. It's not like, oh, well, we have to go to, on a rocket ship to get to the truth body or something like that. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, the basic nature of things is like. So what I didn't do this in this, but I mean, I think about it in terms of like different examples. Like, do you know the rabbit duck illusion? There's a drawing that somebody made in the late 19th century. It's very vivid. There's a couple different versions of it, just rabbit duck on the internet. And it's drawn so cleverly that it absolutely looks like a rabbit and absolutely equally looks like a duck. And they've done these, tests with kids in Germany, and if you show them this picture in the springtime, then most of them think it's a rabbit. But if you show it in the fall, then most of them think it's a duck. And then you can, once you see it as both, you can sort of flip back and forth. Personally, I haven't been able to see it both as a rabbit and a duck simultaneously, which would be like the Buddha level of rabbit duckness, right? But people have told me they can do it. So, really, I don't know. But I guess people can see them both at the same time if you practice. But everybody has their different goals in life. So this I like because they're both right there together. Like, to me, it's much better than two sides of the same coin, which some people say, because the two sides of the same coin are actually separated by a little bit of metal in between. But the rabbit and duck are not separated at all. There's actually all the same stuff. And if you look at it from a springy point of view, then you see one thing, and if you look at exactly the same place and at an autumnal perspective, then you see more likely to see the duck. That's like this. Like this. If I just say this, right? This, instead of saying these glasses, I say this. It's like, well, they are my glasses from a conventional point of view, and this is also emptiness, right? Now the glasses are empty. But there isn't any other place for their emptiness to be but right here with the glasses. Now, if I say that, I'm seeing emptiness because you said that, this is emptiness right here. Well, actually not, because I haven't shifted to the autumnal point of view, right? And the whole idea is to unlike rabbit duck where we can flip back sort of easily, it's like we're stuck. And we can only see it as a rabbit, and we have all these problems that are based on our never being able to see it as anything but a rabbit. Essentially like that, right? But it's also all the time just equally validly seen as a duck. When you learn to see it as a duck, it's not like, that rabbit point of view is so stupid. It's like, well, no, you're going to need the rabbit point of view in order to do rabbit-related things in the springtime. Like that represents virtue, making decisions about correct actions. We need the conventional point of view and the ultimate point of view. Two kinds of knowledge in Tsongkhapa's system. Neither discredits or supersedes the other. You have to be able to see what? You have to value, Tsongkhapa was told by Manjushri to value conventionalities, not posit a kind of emptiness that would destroy the conventional. So, there are tables and chairs and spoons and so forth, conventionally, and also just from a different point of view, these same things the tables and chairs are not emptiness, but like the way Tsongkhapa puts it is that with regard to everything we can point to, there are two natures, or ngo, he says, ngo ni. So there's there's its emptiness, and then there's the basis of emptiness. And we just only see the basis of emptiness and then argue about it. But it also has this emptiness aspect or side or nature, if you want, entity, quality. I'm not sure. Sometimes people do thing. Well, that's kind of odd. But nature. Things have two natures: the conventional nature and the ultimate nature. Versus faces. Two faces. I don't know. Anyway, the rabbit duck is a good one. There's some other. I think there are other example that I'm not thinking of, but.
The stairway that goes up and down.
When you can look at it from one way, is the stairway going up? Escher's drawing. Yeah.
Is the old lady, young lady?
Oh, the old lady and the young lady drawing. There's it's a little bit different. It's more like the coin thing, but Yasutani Roshi had held up a paper fan, and it was like elaborately designed on one side and blank on the other, and he would just keep flipping it around like this. And this is the diversity of phenomena, and this is their basic mode of existence. These have words in it's Jidawe Kenbei Namken and Jinyebe Kenbei Namken, like a perfect kind of knowledge that knows the basic way that things exist, and a perfect kind of knowledge that knows the diversity of the phenomenal world. And when we chant the Heart Sutra, and it says that Buddha was sitting in meditation and didn't say anything for most of the sutra, right? He's meditating on the diversity of the phenomenal world. That's the samadhi that he's in. So, there's these, it's not like Buddha's like, I'm done with all that. It's like if you're going to be compassionately engaged in the world. This is Tsongkhapa's system, remember. If you're going to be compassionately engaged in the world, you have to have an aspect of your omniscience which takes it in.
When you were describing Tsongkhapa right before the Q&A about this, its own quality or characteristic on its own side, you're talking about what is the object contributing?
Yeah. I was trying to describe, I think at that point, the Svatantrika.
Yeah, Tsongkhapa's explanation of Svatantrika is what you're describing.
Yeah.
So you went on to say that since consciousness knew hot is hot conventionally, so it functions to burn conventionally. That was still Tsongkhapa describing Svatantrika.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it does burn conventionally, but the idea is, does it have some characteristic on its own side, leaving aside the question of how it appears to a particular mind. That's the thing that it's right in Lamrim Chama. It's so great, right? I put that quote in there on page 212. The conception that phenomena have some way of an ontological status, or I think that's Derluk, a way of abiding, a mode of existence that in and of themselves, without being posited through the force of an awareness. So if you can talk about what it is without considering anybody's point of view, then that means that that's got that character on the object side. So fire is hot conventionally, but conventionally for the Prasangika means relative to concludes the idea of being relative to a perspective. And fire is hot conventionally in Svatantrika means that ultimately we can't find the hotness of fire, but it does contribute its own characteristic of hotness from its own side to the encounter of mind and object.
So then the other question, Stephen and I were talking about this. So I'll pose the question in my way. Would you say that object designated and especially basis of designation are defined depending on what system you're in? Or is there an actual definition for those terms? Like especially the object, the designated object. What's the definition of that? Or would it have to depend on what system you were in?
I don't know. I haven't actually seen definitions of those terms. So the object designated means like everything that exists, because there isn't anything like so there's some things that exist that at this very moment we don't know about, but they also exist as mere designations by a future mind. And just like that, we have to say that because of the discussion we had before about like how we retroactively bring things into existence. So everything that exists merely as a imputation, designation, or description, as something. So I like to think about it like different people have different ways of talking about it, right? And when I was down at Vajrapani, everybody there always wanted to use imputation by thought, and it's like specifically ascription by a conceptual thought. And we do say, Delphi doxon, mere imputation by thought. But, what does exactly thought mean for nematodes and so forth is a little hard for me to, reckon with. I just don't know, how thought works in different kinds of beings and what that means. We have a certain idea about what thought is for human beings, but then you have some animals that are, we think these are definitely living beings that are included in, like we're saving these ticks, right? It's yeah, but what are they thinking about? Is that even a sensible question? I don't know. But so because of that, because of my difficulty in conceptualizing the thought processes of small animals, to put it clearly, I've sort of slid into talking about that things exist. Things are positive existing relative to a point of view. That is, there has to be a mind involved. And His Holiness sometimes does talk like this. When he's made these comparisons between contemporary physics and the observer problem. And he said, well, people used to think that everything was just on the object side, but then you get down to certain kinds of situations and it's difficult to talk about what's going on without including the point of view of the observer. And that's why I was pointing to exactly one of the reasons, the part in bold, Tsongkhapa says a conception that phenomena, the object of refutation, the conception that phenomena have a way of existing without being posited through the force of an awareness. He doesn't say there dok, actually. He says lo. So from the point of view of an awareness or a mind, there has to be a mind. So that's why I'm going, we have to be able to say that this is that from a certain point of view. That's what I'm doing for lo, that there's a subjective perspective, a mind or a point of view from which, this is or that is, attractive or aversive. And that's different for nematodes than it is for us, whatever a nematode is. I don't even actually know. But I assume that their preferences are different from ours, and they're based on what naturally feels good to them, right? Based on their body and what they have for sentience, right? Yeah. Anyway, that's, I don't know, did I even get close to answering the question? So everything is an object imputed. It's because there's no way that anything can exist except as an imputation. So that there isn't if you think of basis of imputation, object imputed. It's object imputed already includes everything. It doesn't include just words and stuff like that. That's why I was saying that about labels earlier. And even though that comes out of the tradition, it illuminates things. You have to realize. That's what Jeffrey was trying to say. You should, the object imputed is the cup. It's not the word cup, right? Okay, so the basis of imputation is that with regard to which we make that ascription or designation or assignment of a certain identity, or to which we impute a certain object. So that's all. So I think I did this. Did I do this last year or the year before? Or 2 years before that. Jeffrey, wrote this thing. Did I read those chapters? Or he's like, well, for every object we see, because the basic meaning of this is that all the time we're taking things as just being set up over there on the object side, right? And we don't the letter A thing is easy to remember, right? It's well, the letter A wasn't just set up over on its own side, but it looked like it until we stopped and thought that, oh yeah, we're actually making that ascription or imputation. Well, everything's like that. But we don't stop to think. And this is he's saying, well, you can train your mind in going around every time you take cognizance of chair, think, oh, what's the basis of designation in relation to which I'm assigning, I'm imputing chair. It's it's not that the chair isn't there. It's that It's there as something that you're, just like the letter A is up on the board, but it's there as something that you're ascribing to. And over there at the end of your finger, there's no like actual naturally existent A. Well, it's the same with the chair. It's the same with the Abbey and so forth. Like, so this is what he was saying. This is like a practice, is to train oneself in thinking about, well, what could be, what, in relation to what am I making this imputation? In relationship to what am I making this imputation? It was like go around the room. It's like, well, we say there's some curtains. Like, well, what, in relationship to what are we making that ascription? So we're just through like the door. You know, you can see he was doing the cup, and he's like, well, the top half of the cup and the bottom half of the cup. I mean, like everything has like, there's something in relationship to we're making that imputation. And also then when you say, well, what are those things? Those must be the real things down under there is the basis of imputation. Well, everything exists as an object imputed. There isn't any basis that you come to that's the foundation for this process.
So then the answer to your original question about how do you account for the diversities conventionally, the bottom line answer is kind of like what's real is the measure of the imputation or something. How we make the imputation, that's what we have to do.
Well, I was saying when I was talking about measures, like how real things are, their weight ontologically in terms of, you know, how real they are, is that they don't exist on the side of the object except in relationship to a certain perspective.
Right, so that's how a personification has to conventionally explain diversity?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. Exactly. I mean, because of, you can't just talk, first of all, I think there has to be some diversity, but you can't talk about what, this took a long time for me to understand, and I don't know, I'm not swearing it's right, but there has to be some diversity in the world, and it's consistent with what Sutra has said, you know, about Jidawa and Jineba. There's the mode and the varieties of how things exist. There has to be some diversity in the world, but we can't characterize it or talk about what it is on its own side. You have to characterize it, and it's sort of like, yeah, there's a world out there, but we don't know what it is until we take into account who's looking. Are we talking about a hungry ghost world, or you know what I'm saying? And I don't know. Sometimes it's like if you walk, I used to think about like walking the dog or something like that. A dog is not part of our realms, you know? Do you know what I'm saying? They're not part of our realm. And so it's like, you know, they correctly sense things, lots of things, which we don't. And if we did sense them, it would be very strange. Do you know what I'm saying? And that we correctly sense things that they don't, and you know, and if they did sense those things, it would be very strange, right? Because so it's like just natural for beings who have different kinds of karma, so that their bodies are set up in different ways, that whatever the diversity of the natural world is, it correctly appears to them differently.
And why can't Jeffrey accept what Shakespeare says about the gods?
Oh.
Because he said an aspect, which also makes part, we found that out.
Yeah.
But that seems like a viable explanation based on what you're describing.
Well, I don't like the Jamyang Sheba's explanation there either, because it seems like, it depends on, you know, how you understand it, but the idea seems to be like that there has to be some factor within this wet and moistening stuff that's out there that has so there's this object out there, instead of just having, this is a way to put it, instead of just having one particular defining characteristic, it has 6. Yeah, and that just like, I don't know, it's got a 6-fold in conventionally existent intrinsic character. I mean, I guess you would not want to say that all of these were physically separated. You would have to say they were coextensive with one another. Otherwise, you'd just be into silliness, right? But that's, I don't know, that's the difficulty. Is like, he wants there to be, it feels like he wants there to be something that is sort of naturally existent on the side of the object as the appropriate basis of designation. But I don't know, maybe that's solvable. One of the things that's also like a problem in that passage we were looking at is, and this is hard to know how to talk about, but it's like, well, you have basis of imputation, you have object imputed. Well, in the way he does it in that case is when the gods and the ghosts and humans are going in the river, he's like, he's establishing a priori for the conversation that the basis of imputation is something that's wet and moistening. So, right? So it's like already we know that, okay, we've got something that's wet and moistening already. Now we're going to talk about how it looks from different beings' point of view. Wait a minute. How do we know it was wet and moistening? Maybe from, somebody's point of view, it's dry and chafing. You know what why is it wet and moistening in and of itself, and then some people take this as to be water and some people take it as ambrosia? That's the way his text reads. Hopefully that's not what he meant. Yes.
So you're talking about that certain things referred to as for human.
Yeah.
It's relative. And I'm not thinking like evolution.
Mm.
It all came from like long ago, and we
Mm.
were not quite human. We were more animal than human.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do I begin to understand that? And then as maybe human beings evolve, we could be getting different kind of senses, faculties that could then change this. So
Yeah. Right.
to understand how to understand in this kind of.
No, I don't know is the answer to that. Maybe somebody else has an idea. I mean, I've thought about it as like, we classically we have the 6 realms, and the realms like put all the animals together, even though we know that their bodies and consciousnesses are configured quite differently from one another. And so it just seems like, you have to be able to, then you're like, well, what's right, what's conventionally correct for a bat can't be the same as what's conventionally correct for a nematode or a leopard. Well, once you admit that, then you're like, okay, so the boundaries between regions within which certain things are conventionally correct isn't realms anymore. So you're not, it has to be species. Well, now you're not in the classical Buddhist framework anymore. You're combining classical Buddhism with modern science, and you still then have the problem that you're alluding to is like, well, how do you know where's the exact boundary between these species? Because the species aren't like objectively set up from their own side either. They have to be posited. And do you see what, and that's exactly the problem you're alluding to. If people have, humans that we have today were different in the past than were different in the past before that. And when did they start being part of a different realm? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know. I have not made, you say I've made up a lot of stuff here. I have not made up an answer to that one. I don't know.
There'll be something about your premise in that, because to me, maybe I'm too simple-minded, but to me the whole thing starts with the result, and the Buddha works backwards.
Uh-huh.
So we just label it based on the result. So the whole context, the whole view is about liberation and getting rid of suffering.
Yeah.
And so it puts everything goes backwards from there. So I don't really
Yeah.
think any of these are any problem. The nematode or the toad or the spacewalker or anybody, because you're just, I never take it from the forward to the end. I always take it from the end backwards, and it's just a matter of labeling them. But if you all are going to the same direction, you're going to end up in the same result. And it makes the, I don't know, maybe I'm not getting
Well, one of the things that I mean, at the level at which I'm hearing what you're saying is this falls into speculation about the composition of the arrow that's stuck in our back. I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but it's like, well, we're all wounded and we're all suffering, and now we're arguing about what bird the feathers on the shaft came from. So that's not what you meant.
No, I mean that. I just mean that. I think I mean that. But mostly, what I mean is that everything worked backward from the result. The result was liberation or nirvana. Let's say that was the result, and everything was designated as good or bad based on
Whether it was helpful in relationship to that result.
So then, from that perspective, what's happening on the front side? It's just a matter of labeling. Is it heading you that way?
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I think that's related to what we were talking about earlier when we were saying, well, things aren't good and bad objectively in and of themselves, but except relative to whether they're helpful for certain beings in a certain context and moving in the right direction, right? But so that's right, I think. I mean, that's the problem was like how was more. So does that answer the question about like? Okay, so how do you know, like a god and a ghost are like allowed to see things differently and be contradictory and both be right? That's in Yogacara, that's in, Tsongkhapa. But like, what about like, two different subspecies of tiger or something? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, when do things become different enough that they can have like contradictory, conventionally valid perceptions? That's the question that I thought we were addressing, and that's the question I was saying I don't know the answer to. Yeah. Yeah.
Conditioning would play a big role in it somehow, that we're born and that the beings around us kind of help us formulate a rough or gross view of conventional reality and a way to posit conventional reality, and that we buy into it just from our experience, and then we're in the ballpark.
Yeah, and then we constantly work to refine and improve. That's what we were talking about earlier. You can't just take it that everything we've inherited as worldly convention is correct, because a lot of it is going to be wrong.
So the term force of awareness kind of conjures up this idea that maybe, say we're conventionally in the ballpark about that cup, Tanya and I, and we've been conditioned to believe that it's a cup and it works like a cup. But that she has a very strong and focused mind, and she thinks it's blue, and I have a very scattered and weak mind, and really hadn't even paid attention what color it was, but she told me it's blue, and oh yeah, it's blue.
Well, if she's a reliable person, then that would probably be a...
I don't know, that's kind of what that conjures up, the force of an awareness.
Yeah, I mean...
One versus another.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
Just kind of like an overall comment was really interesting that when we're so outwardly focused that even when we bring up the idea of emptiness or non-emptiness or whatever, we're still out here going, well, what is that thing over there? What is it really? And we're kind of skipping the point, which is how does our mind work? I think Venerable Targa, he was kind of really hitting on the head. So we start from the point of view of my goal is awakening. How do I view all this stuff from that point of view? And for me, it's not. I think some of the things you said really early on in the morning about how our minds work and how we create these differentiations and then we fall in love with them. And, to me, that's like interesting. Like, how does my mind really work? It's not so much what is that plant over there? What's its diversity and what's its distinctive characteristic or whatever?
Mhm.
whatever.
Yeah. Well, it could be that I've, it could be argued certainly that I've chased this too far for it to be like the most immediately practical thing. As I have tried to start at the beginning by saying, well, there is this idea that we have to correctly identify the object of negation to really achieve liberation, and that is the point. So I don't know where we are. We have to work from where we are.
I'm not saying this is a criticism or anything.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, in general, what I notice is that almost every time the subject of emptiness comes up, that, the humans in the room are always saying, well, what is that thing outside of you? What is it really?
Well,
And very little time is spent, what is
Mhm.
this mind really?
Mhm.
This mind really?
Mhm.
These things that are coming up, these conjectures that are coming up.
Mhm.
I know,
Investigating how our
It's just the automatic assumption of objective existence.
right,
And not questioning how things appear to us.
right,
Because we're trying to talk about emptiness without questioning how things appear to us, which is stupidation. Can't do it.
right.
For
Yeah.
me, I'm just so mesmerized by that objective, that concept of objective reality.
Oh, I think we all are. Yeah.
That are not based on that.
No, exactly. No, I have the same feeling. I mean, it's like there's this criticism of the Gelugpa tradition that because it emphasizes valid conventional validity, that it reinforces people's tendency to just take things as existing as they appear, and then to subtract from that something that no one actually understands in the first place. And the problem is I've made that joke, which is hundreds of years old now, but at the same time, I think it's largely about myself. Do you know what I'm saying? It's I just like you, I do tend to say, oh, there's all these things, and oh yeah, they're empty. and so what Jeffrey said, two things related to that stick in my mind. One is, a couple of things. One is he said that for a while he would just go around when he was younger, constantly saying, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Means that I'm wrong to accept things as existing as they appear. This appearance of things as it's appearing is wrong. Even before I think about what it is, I'm already wrong just in how it's appearing. So train himself in being suspicious about what his mind is presenting to him constantly. Another thing he said was that, and I've actually started doing this at one of the Dharma talks I gave down in San Jose. I was supposed to be about emptiness and dependent arising. I just told people to not think about emptiness because we don't have any starting point. Just think about this stuff around here, how it works and how our mind is creating this. If you start by thinking about emptiness, then you're way too far away from our immediate experience. If you could say well, why is it that this seems to exist? How does this paper, my mind, constitute this as a piece of paper that's out there in and of itself? What is it? And then this is what Jeffrey is saying is that if you practice thinking, okay, I'm imputing this as a piece of paper, what's the basis of imputation? And then train in reminding yourself that all of these things are correctly, usually, we hope, being imputed, but they're not. The appearance of them as being other than imputed is what's wrong. I don't know. Yeah, it occurred to me that people are confused about emptiness, so I'm not sorry that I wrote Introduction to Emptiness, but my perspective now is that it's not always the most helpful thing for people to start thinking about emptiness rather than thinking about like you're saying, what is my mind doing so as to constitute the world to appear this way? Investigate the appearances rather than realize emptiness, and then that's how you get to understanding. Yes.
Yes, when you are investigating, you are using your own mind. So it's like the two are working together. So when you're investigating an object,
Mm-hmm.
you're investigating your own mind. So
Mm-hmm.
you're actually
Yeah.
getting the job done.
Yeah, because you're investigating how your mind is constituting that object as that. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's right. Mm. And then you have the in the Prasangika way that the investigator herself is, is colorblind and is trying to, because not being able to distinguish is like Jeffrey going around saying, I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Well, are you inherently existent as wrong? Right? It's like, it's like everything that you're thinking is part of the process is still appearing in this false way.
Valid, but it's definitely not accurate.
Yes, there you go. Yeah. So it's like, yes.
What about if you say, I was thinking, say it's not like that, rather than, it's not like that makes me stop and think, is that a way of doing it as well? Because then you're starting right from the beginning. It's not like that, or this is not like that. So
It's like,
a way of doing it as well.
I think that's like what Jeffrey was doing, is like taking an approach of being suspicious about what appearances, like question appearances, don't take things. So the teaching is that things don't exist as they appear, even to our senses in the Prasangika system. So we have to use this information from our senses. We can't, like if you go to the point of saying, oh, we can't trust this, and so what are we going to trust? Well, I was like, I will trust the Lama, but then how do I know I'm even hearing what she's saying correctly? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know how you get started unless you have some idea that at least some aspect of some portion of your input has, some reliability. That's the Prasangika way. That's the way of understanding. It's like all the data is contaminated. Some of it is completely wrong, but also some of it is correct, even though there's this corruption. And so you have to make inferences or deductions, with what you've got that's reliable, that's mixed in there with the false appearance. I don't know. I haven't actually, that's as far as I've gotten with that example, is to think about, ontological color blindness I think is pretty good, because we can't tell the difference between inherent existence and existence. Because like when we see something and we take something to be existing, that's already completely mixed up with the idea of something inherently existing. So if working with the reasonings doesn't ever give you a feeling of being threatened, do you know what I'm saying? Then they're not touching home, because if they're not they're somehow like affecting or making you worried about whether things will be destroyed, then they're not affecting your sense of inherent existence either, because in the starting point, those are right together. It's very difficult to thread them apart, because constantly things are appearing to us like existence and inherent existence are just right together. At the appearance level, we know that sometimes we have like manifest conceptions of things as like being objectively real that are assenting to or reinforcing, the false appearance. But the false appearance is like persistent. It lets up when we're in, if you're actually in namsha, if you're in meditative equipoise on emptiness, or if you become a Buddha. But that's about it. The rest of the time you always have this sense of it. If you see a cup, it's always looking like an inherently existent cup. So what you have to do is get to a point where, it appears that way, but you don't believe it for a second. So I always, it's like when I get up in the morning, I go over to the sink, 99 times out of 100, there's going to be a mirror there. And I never get startled by the man who's vividly appearing in the mirror. Very vividly appearing, especially when the mirror is really clean. It's quite apparent that there is a person there in the room with me, right? It's vividly appearing. And yet, I never get scared even once. it's like a resistance joint, like that, right? It's like that. So you can get to a point where even though there's a vivid appearance of the cup as inherently existent, you're just like, it's of no significance because just like, you know that it's utterly wrong. So that would be, an advanced bodhisattva could have that kind of understanding of false appearance, of just completely distrusting it, the point, right? But it's still appearing. Yeah. Okay. Well, we have a few minutes left, but yes, Stephen?
I just have a question going back to the rabbit-duck illusion.
Okay.
Say you're looking at a tree, and you're saying that rabbit's the conventional point of view and the duck's the ultimate.
Yeah, I just made
Could you
that.
say that there's a tree but there's not a tree and go back between those? Or could you also say there's a tree but there's also the branches and the trunk? Which way is, do you see what I'm saying?
I think I do. Yeah.
You go back and forth between those two.
Well, yeah, there is a tree conventionally, and there's not a tree ultimately. So it is like that. If you say, well, there's a tree and there's also these like bits and pieces that I'm designating as a tree, I think that's also really helpful because when we say, oh, there's a tree but there's not a tree, I don't think we really know what not a tree means at that point. It just sounds like tree semi-exists. Because, so it's true that ultimately there's not a tree and conventionally there is. But what does that mean for there to ultimately be not a tree? Well, to have that not just be words, you have to investigate how it is that the tree exists as a mere imputation to a basis of designation. And that's why thinking about, like why I was suggesting that instead of thinking tree, not tree, that you think tree, and what is it that I'm imputing as a tree? Because that will get you to the point where you're starting to realize, yeah, there's a tree, but there's not a tree over there on the side of the tree that is the tree from its own side. And then you're starting to understand what not tree means. Yeah. Okay. One more?
I'll ask a quick one on the language. I find the language very confusing sometimes when you say, well, external objects exist, but then things exist by imputation.
Well, yes, that is confusing.
I find that very mind-boggling.
Yes, that it is. Correct. No, it is. It's really, a lot of this, if you think it was like, well, it's clear that the mind is somehow tangled up in constituting phenomena, then, one way to approach it is to just say, well, they're of one nature, the mind and the object are like just are the same, and there aren't any objects out there apart from our minds. And there's some systems that have gone that direction, both in the West and in Buddhism, that have gone in that direction, saying we can't really know like whether there's anything apart from our minds. All we just know is this mind, this awareness of the object and object are like peering together over and over and over. And that's the fruition of our karma, right? So that could be like, that's a system, right? A way of thinking. But then, in this system, they're saying, there are objects that exist in a conventional sense apart from our mind. They're not, intrinsically separate from us, but yeah, there are objects that are apart from our minds. There's all kinds of problems too, if you start saying everything is just of one nature of the mind, that system runs into trouble. And one of the worst problems is that it ends up reifying the mind. Because everything else is just an appearance to the mind, and the mind itself is like a foundation for the appearance of the world. So, Prasangika and some forms of Svatantrika really, really want to avoid that. And so they say, it's like conventionally there are minds and there are objects of mind. Yeah. And they're not one entity.
Yeah, I wasn't sort of getting at the mind only thing. I think I was thinking more
You mean imputation?
By saying, but because of the way that exists is used differently to me, you know what I mean?
No.
Something
I mean, it is, but I don't know what you mean.
imputation, but external objects also exist, implying a different kind of ontological status a little bit.
No, it's the same objects. It's the same objects. External objects are mere imputations. I know. Well, yeah, it is. It's hard to understand how that can be the case. So what it means is that they don't exist they're external. There are external objects, but we can't say anything about what they are, or what their character, or what their nature is, or how many of them are, or what the color they are. They don't exist as anything from their own side objectively. This is how I understand it. There's just there is a field of objects that exist. It's not just me in my mind and stuff appearing to it. There's a field, there's a big world with lots of different things. What are those things? Depends on who's looking. Things don't have some natural way of being this or that out there on their own side. But it is correct from a human point of view to say that's a cat and that's a hat. Well,
I just don't think I was expressing myself very well. I hear what you're saying.
well, no, I don't know. I think maybe, I mean, yeah, the idea that things are mere imputations and then to turn around and say that they're external, right?
And I can see that
I can see why that would appear as a direct conflict. Exactly.
Because I'm not saying that, I'm not going in the mind-only direction. It's just, it seems to be, I think I'll just shut up.
No. It's like,
Is your thinking external equals objective?
Maybe that's what she's thinking.
That's the problem. Is we think
Yeah, I think that might be
external
it.
means objective.
Thank you. Yeah, that's right. That could be it.
I see that there's a bunch of aggregates, even though there's nothing in them, there's still some aggregate, a bunch of whatever it is there that's still not in and of itself. But yeah, it's okay. I'm not clear in the myself.
Yeah.
I think I'm confused about the question. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, no, it's definitely so I guess what I'm saying is it's really different from our ordinary way of thinking about things. We either want to be, there's the realist position and the idealist position. The realist position is like, well, everything's real and it's out there and it's objectively external, and we either look at it or we don't, right? But then it's just real whether we look at it or we don't. And then the other thing is saying, well, who knows what's out there? We just know what's appearing to us in our mind. And it's like apparently my karma to be, having an appearance of a green tree, over there. And so the object and the subject are just like right here together in my experience, which is all I really know, right? And maybe all there is. So there's an idealist way and a realist way, and this is neither of those. It's dispelling any idea of realism by saying things exist as mere imputations, and they can be talked about how they exist or what they are, what their characteristic is, only in relationship to a particular mind. On the other hand, it's avoiding the idea of idealism and all the problems philosophically that come along with it by saying, no, there are lots of different objects, like there's your body and my body, and it's not all in someone's head. Yeah.